There are moments in life when you can't quite name what is changing. You only know that the familiar rhythm of your days suddenly feels different. The things that once weighed heavily on your mind no longer carry the same force. For Pisces, transformation rarely arrives through dramatic turns. It doesn't announce itself loudly, it comes quietly. In very ordinary moments, a calm morning, a passing thought, or a sense of ease you didn't used to feel before. Not because everything has become perfect, but because something inside you has grown still enough to see things more clearly. Less fear, less need to prove anything. And from that quiet inner space, a new cycle slowly begins to open. Unrushed, unpretentious, but deeply real. If you are a Pisces, you may recognize yourself somewhere in this story. And from here, we begin with the first chapter, where a new beginning appears, softer than you ever expected. The most important beginnings in life rarely arrive the way we expect them to. They don't knock on the door loudly, and they don't come with clear signs that make you say, "This is it." Instead, they arrive slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed by anyone else except you. For Pisces, this feeling often starts with a very subtle shift. You wake up one morning, everything around you looks the same, but something inside you doesn't. The thoughts that once weighed heavily on your heart suddenly feel lighter. Old stories no longer pull you back to fix them or explain them. Not because you've forgotten, but because you no longer want to relive them one more time. This kind of change doesn't look like a victory. It feels more like the moment you set down a heavy bag after a long journey and realize you've been carrying it for far too long. No one is asking you to keep going, and you no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Pisces has always been known for feeling more deeply than necessary. You stayed in places that drained you simply because you couldn't bring yourself to leave. You once believed that enduring was part of love, part of maturity, part of being kind. But in this phase of life, a very different kind of clarity appears. Not clarity to judge, but clarity to recognize where you no longer belong. You begin to grow quieter, but not because you're sad. Quiet because you no longer feel the need to explain your emotions to the world. Quiet because you understand that not everything needs to be spoken to have value. This is how a new cycle often begins for Pisces. There is no sudden moment of awakening, just a deep enough stillness that allows you to hear your own inner voice more clearly than before. In that space, you realize you're no longer afraid of moving slowly, no longer restless when others seem to move faster, and no longer forcing yourself to become someone else just to meet external expectations. What replaces it is a sense of steadiness, not standing higher, just standing in the right place. This calm doesn't come from having every problem resolved. It comes from no longer seeing every problem as an enemy. You learn to observe life instead of fighting it. You learn to let what no longer serves you fall away on its own, instead of holding on at all costs. At this stage, Pisces doesn't talk much about what they're going through. That's not because it's a secret, but because you understand that some changes only matter when they are fully lived, not announced. You may still be doing the same job, still living in familiar surroundings, still carrying everyday responsibilities. But inside, a new inner anchor is quietly forming. An anchor that doesn't depend on how much others approve of you. It doesn't depend on whether everything unfolds according to plan. Just a simple knowing, I can stay with myself even when things are unclear. And from that foundation, the next chapters finally find space to open. Not rushed, not forced. Just the natural continuation of a journey long enough for you to understand who you are and why you no longer need to return to who you once were. From here, the story continues, beginning with that very quiet change. If before anything new had the chance to enter your life, Pisces had already walked a path that is rarely named for what it truly was. It wasn't a journey of grand decisions or obvious victories. It was a long stretch of staying, listening, and quietly enduring. You grew familiar with carrying more than your share, not because anyone demanded it, but because somewhere inside, you lived a belief that if you were gentle enough, patient enough, things would eventually be okay in some way. That belief helped you survive many difficult seasons, but it also kept you in spaces that no longer nourished you. You offered care before being asked. You placed other people's emotions first, before giving yourself time to truly listen inward. and slowly exhaustion became so familiar that you stopped naming it. For years, old Pisces learned how to adjust, to fit into circumstances, into people, into expectations around you. And at times, that adjustment cost you the memory of what it felt like to be fully yourself. There were small moments, quiet ones, that left deep impressions, when you realized you were showing up more for others than for yourself. When your kindness no longer created connection, but only space, you began to wonder, very gently, whether always yielding was truly love, or simply a habit of avoiding conflict you had carried for a long time. Yet through that journey, Pisces did not grow bitter. You did not close your heart. Instead, you observed. You accumulated experience. You learned, even when the lessons arrived slowly, and sometimes left you tired. You began to understand that not everyone has the capacity to receive sincerity in the way you offer it. And that realization did not diminish your sincerity. It simply showed you that it needs to be placed in the right hands. You also came to see that protecting your energy is not selfish. It is a form of self-respect, necessary if you want to remain kind without losing yourself. There were evenings after everything had quieted down, when you sat with yourself and saw more clearly the difference between love and self-sacrifice, between patience and self-abandonment. And in those quiet spaces, a subtle shift took place. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniably real. You began to allow yourself to stop before becoming depleted, to pause before responding, to walk away when something no longer fit, even if no one was clearly at fault. This journey of endurance did not make you harder in a closed-off way. It made you deeper in recognizing what truly nourishes the soul and what only takes without giving back. You learned that love does not need pain to be meaningful, and that your presence holds value even when you are not trying to please everyone. From this point forward, Pisces walks on a different foundation, steadier without heaviness, softer yet with clear boundaries. You no longer measure growth by how much you can endure. You begin to see the ability to listen to yourself as a form of wisdom worth honoring. And it is this foundation, formed through quiet years, that has shaped who you are today. Mature enough to move forward without carrying old burdens. Now you're aware enough to recognize that new chapters can only truly begin when you no longer have to trade yourself just to stay. After everything you've been through, Pisces does not step out of the old cycle with anger or disappointment. This ending doesn't require a declaration. It doesn't need anyone to decide what was right or wrong. It happens quietly, like leaving a familiar room after staying there for many years, without carrying unnecessary belongings, without turning back to look for one more reason to stay. You simply know that you've been there long enough, that you've learned what needed to be learned, and that there is no longer a reason to keep holding yourself together just to endure. For Pisces, letting go at this stage doesn't feel like loss. It feels like a soft exhale after holding your breath for far too long. You no longer feel the need to explain your choices to others. You no longer wait for someone to fully understand everything you've lived through. Not because you've grown colder, but because you've realized that not every truth needs recognition to hold value. Some things only need to be acknowledged within you. You look back at the old cycle with a rare sense of calm, without exaggerating the pain, without denying the beautiful moments that once existed. Everything is placed exactly where it belongs, like pieces that have completed their role in a larger picture. Through this process, Pisces slowly understands that ending a chapter does not mean rejecting everything that happened. On the contrary, it is a way of honoring your own journey by not extending what has already fulfilled its purpose out of fear of emptiness. There is a kind of goodbye that needs no words, no tears, no dramatic climax, only a silence deep enough for you to hear your own inner truth. It is the moment you stop asking, "What if?" Stop replaying old scenarios in your mind, and stop wondering whether you could have done things differently. You realize that every choice you made at the time came from the best understanding you had then, and blaming yourself now no longer serves a purpose. This farewell is more spiritual than emotional. Less reaction, more release. It feels like setting down expectations that no longer fit, connections held together by habit, and roles you once carried just to keep everything from falling apart. Pisces understands that some relationships don't end because love was missing, but because they no longer offer enough space for both people to grow. But letting go in silence is not avoidance. It is a conscious choice to stop causing harm to yourself and to others. At this stage, you no longer wish to carry the version of yourself that lived through endurance alone, the version that tried to understand everything, accept everything, and hoped things would eventually improve with time. You say goodbye to that self, not with rejection, but with gratitude. Grateful because it helped you survive. Aware enough to know it no longer belongs on the road ahead. When the emptiness appears after this closure, Pisces does not rush to fill it. You allow yourself to remain in that quiet space, to fully feel what it means to be lighter, more open, and more honest with yourself. No longer holding tension in your shoulders, no longer playing a role, no longer proving that you deserve to stay. It is within this open space that a new foundation begins to form, not loudly, but steadily, strong enough to carry you forward without the weight of old burdens. The old cycle does not end to prove that you have overcome everything, but to remind you that some phases in life fulfill their purpose by leaving. And when you allow that ending to happen gently, you also create space for something new to enter. Not from lack, but from a version of you that is lighter, more honest, and finally ready to live in alignment with who you truly are. After the old cycle closes gently and without resistance, Pisces steps into a different space of life, where the idea of success begins to change its shape. It is no longer a destination to be reached at any cost, no longer something to compare or prove to anyone else. At this stage, its success does not arrive as a new pressure replacing an old one. It feels more like a steadier rhythm, slow enough that you don't lose yourself along the way. You begin to see that what was once called achievement often came with long-lasting exhaustion, and that not every path that leads to a result is worth stepping onto. Instead of chasing familiar formulas, Pisces learns to listen to the body and to the emotional response that arises before each choice. Some opportunities look impressive on the surface, but when you imagine yourself inside them, you don't feel peace. And for the first time, you allow yourself to say no without explanation. This shift does not come from fear. It comes from a deeper understanding of personal values. You begin choosing paths that align with your natural rhythm. Paths where you can move forward without forcing yourself to become harder than you need to be. You realize that exhaustion is not proof of effort, and constant busyness does not mean you are moving in the right direction. In this new cycle, Pisces allows success to exist alongside rest, alongside the quiet pauses needed to restore energy. You no longer feel guilty for slowing down because you understand that speed does not determine the depth of a journey. Success now takes the shape of stability, of small, steady progress, of the quiet reassurance that you are not trading your peace for results. Outwardly, things may not look dramatic or impressive, but inwardly, you feel a solid foundation slowly taking form. It is the feeling of trusting what you are building, even when not all answers are clear yet. You learn to measure success not by immediate recognition, but by whether it allows you to live in tune with your natural rhythm. Some days, success is simply finishing your work without carrying stress home, having enough space to take a deep breath, to reconnect with yourself after a long day. Pisces also realizes that sustainability doesn't come from doing more, it comes from doing what matters. You begin investing energy in what can nourish you over the long term, instead of chasing short-lived results that leave you drained. This shift doesn't take away ambition, it reshapes it. Ambition becomes healthier, rooted in values rather than driven by outside pressure. In this new space, you no longer need to constantly ask whether you are good enough. A sense of steadiness replaces doubt, and you begin to trust that moving forward calmly is a form of strength. There are very human moments when you pause mid-journey, take a deep breath, and realize you no longer feel chased by time or expectations. In that moment, a simple thought rises within you, not to impress anyone, just to remind yourself that things are where they need to be, not perfect, but balanced enough to continue, not dazzling, but stable enough to remain. And in that quiet steadiness, Pisces understands that true success is not where you arrive, but how you exist throughout the journey that leads you there. When love enters Pisces' life at this stage, it doesn't arrive as a promise to soothe old wounds. It doesn't come with the feeling that something needs to be fixed or made up for. It arrives naturally. At a time when you are no longer searching for someone to make you feel whole. Pisces steps into this new connection from a very different place than before. You are full enough now that you no longer expect others to understand you before you understand yourself. Love is no longer a place to escape loneliness. It becomes a space where you share the peace you already carry. You don't enter this relationship asking whether you are enough. You no longer question your own worth. And that alone changes everything about how you show up. You don't need to become more agreeable, more pleasing, or more easily accepted. You are simply yourself, and that is enough for the connection to unfold gently. At this stage, Pisces no longer sees love as a test. There is no constant proving of care, no measuring of loyalty, no challenges created to validate feelings. There is no need to control, to monitor, or to hold tightly out of fear of losing. Instead, trust grows from very human moments, from listening to each other when one of you is tired, from respecting personal space, from allowing each other to be real without hiding. This new love does not ask you to make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life. It does not force you to choose between who you are and the relationship. On the contrary, it allows you to keep growing, to keep changing, without the fear that growth will break the bond. The two people in this relationship don't come together because they need to be rescued. They come together because they recognize a deep enough harmony to continue forward side by side. There are moments that seem ordinary, yet carry great meaning. Moments when you are with them and don't feel the need to brace yourself. Moments when silence does not create distance. Moments when you can share a long day without fear of being judged. Pisces realizes that this is the first time love does not require the sacrifice of essential parts of yourself just to keep things peaceful. You don't have to guess what the other person is thinking. You don't have to read between the lines. You don't have to worry that speaking your truth will complicate everything. The sense of safety here does not come from perfection. It comes from the ability to face differences without turning them into threats. You understand now that a lasting relationship is not built on dependence, but on a choice made again and again. The choice to stay. The choice to listen. The choice to respect each other even when you don't fully agree. For Pisces, love is no longer a place to heal old wounds. It is a place where those wounds no longer control how you love. You bring into this relationship a heart that has learned how to care for itself. And that is what creates a rare sense of balance. When two whole people choose to walk together, not out of need but out of desire, the relationship is no longer built on the fear of loss. It is built on honest presence, on the quiet reassurance that both of you can move forward side by side, without dimming each other's individual path. And in that space, Pisces understands that love does not need to be loud to be deep. Sometimes it is the calm, the absence of rescue, and the quiet companionship that form the strongest foundation for a relationship that can stay with you for a very long time. As the new cycle slowly comes into view, Pisces is not being asked to become better, stronger, or more complete than before. There is no list of things you need to fix, no test to prove that you are ready. The only question at this stage is much simpler and yet much deeper. Are you willing to allow yourself to receive? For a long time, you became used to giving, used to standing back up after every fall, used to expecting very little gentleness from life. Receiving, for you, sometimes feels harder than trying. Not because you don't want it, but because you learned to rely on yourself so completely that you forgot what it feels like to be supported. This new cycle doesn't arrive to ask you to carry more responsibility. It arrives to remind you that good things do not always need to be earned through exhaustion. Pisces has walked far enough to understand that every important lesson has already been learned through lived experience, not through books, not through advice, but through staying, through letting go, and through moments of silence when the heart was already full. You don't need to return to learn old lessons again. What needed to be released has been released gently, without force, without regret. And from the space created by that letting go, something new appears. A space wide enough to take a deep breath and to experience life in a different way. Opening yourself to receive does not mean loosening your boundaries or losing the clarity you worked so hard to build. On the contrary, it is a conscious choice. A choice where you allow success, love, and peace to enter without questioning whether you deserve them. You no longer need to convince yourself that everything will be okay. You are calm enough now to accept that not everything needs to be controlled to be safe. At this stage, Pisces learns to receive good things with appreciation, without rushing to hold on, without fearing their loss. You understand that when something arrives at the right time, it doesn't need to be held tightly to stay. The peace you feel now is not the result of life becoming perfect. It is the result of no longer resisting what is happening. You allow yourself to rest when needed, to feel joy when it arises, to stay with your true emotions without reshaping them to fit outside expectations. The final message of this cycle is not a call to action. It doesn't set a specific goal for you to chase. It is simply a gentle reminder that sometimes growth is not measured by how much more you can endure, but by how much you can receive without feeling diminished. When you allow yourself to receive, you are not taking from anyone else, and you are not doing anything wrong. You are simply agreeing to live a more balanced life, where gentleness is no longer something you must create on your own. And if you are listening to this story right now, perhaps it isn't to find an answer. Perhaps it is only to recognize that this sense of readiness has been there for some time. Not because of luck, not because something extraordinary is about to happen, but because you have gone far enough, deep enough, and been honest enough with yourself to allow good things to stay. As this video comes to a close, you don't need to do anything right away. Just hold on to that quiet sense of ease. Carry it with you into the days ahead. And trust that the path forward can unfold much more gently when you no longer refuse what life is offering you.